Welcome back to KD&D, the show where we talk about all things Dungeons & Dragons. Today I want to share something a little different with my viewers. We're going to talk about a homebrew training system that I've been using to help my player characters acquire new proficiencies in different skills, different weapons, and a lot of different stuff. So, why would you want to use this system? A lot of the times when I have young players and I give them downtime, they will ask me if they can practice with their sword, and we'll go through a narrative scene. They make a check to see how good their practice goes, and then afterwards they always expect something to come from that practice, like, increased damage or increased chance to hit with that weapon. And I don't think they're wrong for thinking this, but then what I always have to tell them is, you'll get a better bonus to hit on that weapon once you level up and your strength ability score or your dexterity ability score increases. And that always feels kind of bad. It's like, why am I doing this downtime training if it doesn't have any mechanical benefit until I level up anyway? And one thing I suppose you could do is give players experience for their role play or their training, but this system's going to make that feel a little bit more immediate, and it kind of gamifies training. And it has many more applications beyond just weapon training, as you will see here. So, whenever a character has time to train a skill, learn a language, work with some tools, a weapon, or armor, the Dungeon Master may allow them to make a training check as a D20 test. The result of this D20 test will determine a number of additional dice they'll roll to show how many proficiency points they're earning from this training session. Proficiency points will accumulate slowly over time into a pool of experience that they will then track separately on their character sheet. Whenever this pool of proficiency points reaches certain amounts, the Dungeon Master can award proficiency, expertise, or other bonuses to that character. So what kind of skills can be trained? Any skill that's listed on your character sheet. You could always invent a new one. I had a player character the other day spend a lot of time dancing, so I gave them a separate dancing skill that was separate from the performance skill. You could also train with a weapon. You could train a language. Other options could be training with a weapon or a spell to make it more powerful. You could increase a spell's damage, increase its save DC, its range, etc. Most recently, I had a player who wanted to increase the amount of damage dice that his sleep spell would do. So over a week-long period, he was practicing with his spell. I was using this system, and once he reached 200 proficiency points, I bumped it up from 5d8 of sleep damage to 6d8. Not a huge difference, but the player still really enjoyed that process. So when can training happen? For certain skills, learning languages, practicing with a different type of tool, artisans tools, training is most likely going to happen through some sort of role play or during downtime. But training with weapons and armor could be done during combat and could award proficiency points per the Dungeon Master's discretion. Typically, I have a training check be made after 1 day of time has passed, where a character has made a concerted effort towards improving their ability on the thing they are training with. So what does it look like when you make a training check? As I said, a training check is done via a D20 test. If the character has an ability modifier that would apply to the skill being trained, they could add that modifier to the D20 test. The total number rolled on a training check determines how many proficiency points a character stands to earn for this training session. So examples here would be, if you were training with a weapon, you could roll the D20, and if it's a strength-based weapon, you would add your strength modifier to that roll. And if it was a dex-based weapon, your dex modifier. If you were working to learn a language using a textbook, you could add your intelligence modifier to the D20 test. But if you were learning a language via conversation, you could add your charisma or your wisdom to that D20 test. It's all kind of up to the Dungeon Master and the player, whichever feels most appropriate in that moment. So the result of that training check, and when you roll a D20, you're going to get a number somewhere between 1 and 20 or higher if modifiers are being applied. The way that I have this done is if you roll a natural 1 on your training check, no progress is made in your training for that day. You gain 0 proficiency points. If you roll somewhere between a 2 and a 5, you take 1 more D20, you roll that, you get an 18. Let's say we're using the system where I add a modifier to it. Say I'm learning a language via talking to people. I rolled an 18. I'm going to add my +3 charisma modifier to that. I get 21 proficiency points for the day. And I'm going to track that down separately on my character sheet. Now, let's say my training check resulted in somewhere between a 5 and a 10. I would then roll 2d20 plus my modifiers. Somewhere between 10 and 20, roll 3d20, add your modifiers. Somewhere 20 or higher, roll 4d20. If you want to make it where if they rolled above 25, you could make it 5d20 that are added to this. A natural 20, one thing you could do if they roll a natural 20 on their training check, you could add an additional d20, you could double the amount of proficiency points they double. It's all kind of very up to you. Another thing that I've done in the past on one-shots to use this system but kind of accelerate things was after the training check was done, I allowed them to roll a number of D100s instead of D20s. And that way they could acquire proficiency with a thing that they were trying to get in this single 4-hour one-shot. The current system, as is, serves to work well over a long campaign. So, I kind of just talked about this, but Dungeon Masters could modify the DC if you don't like the range that I have here on the different DCs. You could modify it to fit your campaign better. You could always give advantage on the training check or add extra D20s to a character's proficiency points roll if the particular training session is benefited by an expert in the skill. If you have an expert blacksmith showing how to use their tools, give them advantage on the training check or add something in the proficiency points roll. Or if they have something similar, like they're working with a speaker of the language or a master of the skill, spell, or weapon. The proficiency points roll could be done with a different dice than the D20 if you so choose. Like I said, bump it up to a D100, bump it down if you want to make it a little bit more tough to gain this proficiency. On the note of gaining proficiency, the way that I've done it is once the speaker gains 200 proficiency points, they gain the proficiency. So after they've gained 200 points over time, they now know the language. A Dungeon Master should modify this arbitrary number up or down depending on the difficulty of the skill or the relative inexperience of the individual training. Perhaps 200 points would help you read a language and write in it, but you need to get 300 proficiency points before you can speak fluently. It's all up to you as the Dungeon Master and the player on what feels best for your campaign. A Dungeon Master may choose to award proficiency points for other things they accomplish in the game, whether it's creative roleplay using the skill, the discovery of some sort of secret within the world that would give you experience, or the use of a magical item, or when you make a natural 20 using that particular skill, weapon, or spell. I had one where a character was working towards an Arcana proficiency, and they rolled a natural 20 on an Arcana check, and because of that, I just let them go ahead and make a roll for some more proficiency points. And that helped move the scales along towards gaining their skill through an applicable moment in the game, not just in downtime. So, I've got an example here to kind of bring it all together. This particular example I used in my real game. Our ranger decided at a later level that he wanted to switch from his Beastmaster class, I believe he was, over to the Drake Warden Ranger when that first came out. And instead of this having just being an overnight change or a retconned thing, we had him slowly build up a relationship with a wyvern that had been in the area, and then he received a magic item that helped him learn the Draconic language. Again, instead of just magically overnight, he now knows this language. He actually worked towards it through having conversations with NPCs that knew Draconic, reading texts in the Draconic language, and having conversations and working on commands with his Drake. So let me show you exactly how that worked. Okay, so on the right-hand side here, I have the description I wrote up for a magical bow that I gave him. This bow gave him magical aid towards learning the Draconic language, and it was one of my first ways of trying to implement this into my game. Instead of making it a whole new system, I introduced the entire party. I introduced it through this one character and this one magic weapon, which is a great option for you too if you're not sure that you want to use this, but your players want to try it out. So anytime he did something to try and work on his Draconic language, he was able to roll an intelligence check. I ended up changing this a little bit throughout as we worked on it because, as you can see on his character sheet, he didn't have the highest intelligence. So I allowed him to use his wisdom by sitting and listening, or his charisma if he was having a conversation. If he rolled between a 1 and a 5, I said he made no progress. I found throughout the game that made things a little bit punishing. If you're having a day where you're rolling low all day long, and it shows that you gain no proficiency points. That's a bit tough, so I changed it to just a natural 1. But let's say he rolled somewhere between a 5 and a 15. He would roll 2d20, add his intelligence and his charisma, and then that went towards his total of proficiency points. On this item, I called it language points because it was very specific to what he was trying to do. I said that if he was talking to a creature that was a dragon, classified as a dragon, he could roll an additional d20 on top of whatever he had rolled for his proficiency points. I also outlined that if he spent time over a rest, writing or reading a draconic text for practice towards that avenue of the proficiency, he would be participating in activity like this over the course of a short rest, and he could add 1 d20 plus his dexterity plus his intelligence, kind of working on practicing writing that out, implementing dexterity. So you can definitely get creative with it. So in practice, this is how it would work. He would say, all right, so I'm going to spend a big chunk of my long rest tonight practicing my letters for the draconic alphabet. So I'd say, okay, go ahead and roll a dexterity check. And he would do so. So, looks like he rolled a 23. So on a 23, he is now going to roll 3d20 plus intelligence plus charisma. I would say intelligence and dexterity for this one. So I'm going to roll 3d20 plus his intelligence, which is 0, plus his dexterity, which is 5. So 3d20 plus 5. He gains 39 proficiency points towards this skill. So that goes into a pool that he tracks on his character sheet. And once that pool reaches 200, that's when I said he gained proficiency in the language. So again, you can bump that pool up or down, whatever fits your campaign, and you can apply this system to anything that someone would want to train with, be it the sleep spell, working with tools, training with a weapon, and it's a really nice way of representing your character's growth in a skill, as opposed to just overnight when they multi-class or overnight when they level up, they're all of a sudden acquired and blessed with these new abilities. Just adds a little bit more realism to your game. So I hope you found this interesting. Let me know if you try it out. Let me know if you change it. I'm always trying to tweak these things around. And if you would like a PDF of this thing, drop something in the comments and I'll see if I can whip something up and drop a link below. But subscribe and like if you like these ideas and you want to see what I have coming next. Thanks a lot.